This episode of The Deep Dive is brought to you by Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. A series of AI-narrated meditations designed to feed your intellect and challenge conventional wisdom.
Yes.
Each bite-sized episode is packed with thought-provoking ideas, surprising facts, and insightful analysis, all designed to spark your curiosity and expand your understanding of the world. We all know Social Security is kind of a big deal, right? I mean, it's always in the news and everyone's got an opinion.
Yeah, for sure. It's one of those things that touches almost every American's life in some way, so naturally it sparks a lot of debate.
Exactly. And usually when we think about Social Security, we think numbers, statistics, all those projections about whether it's going to be around for future generations.
You know, all those charts and graphs trying to predict if the money will run out, it can get pretty dense, right?
It can. But what if I told you that the words we use to talk about Social Security, the language itself, might actually be even more important than those numbers?
Yeah, that's interesting. You're saying the way we frame the issue, the words we choose, that could actually have a bigger impact on how we think about Social Security than the raw data.
That's exactly what we're diving into today.
I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, we're taking a deep dive into this book by Robert Asen, Invoking the Invisible Hand, Social Security and the Privatization Debates.
Okay, so we're going beyond just the policy specifics and looking at how language has been used to persuade and influence people's opinions.
Exactly. Asen really digs deep into how language, rhetoric, has shaped the whole conversation around Social Security, especially when it comes to those heated privatization debates.
Privatization, that's a whole other can of worms, right? But I get it. Focusing on the language, the rhetoric, it's like looking under the hood to see how those arguments are really constructed.
Right. We're not here to debate the pros and cons of specific privatization plans, but to explore how the language we use, both historically and today, shapes how we view Social Security, its very purpose, and what we think is possible for its future.
I'm all ears. Let's get into it. Where do we start?
Well, one of the things that really struck me in Asen's book was this idea of how powerful rights-based rhetoric has been. From the very beginning, Social Security was often presented as a return on workers' contributions, like something you earned, a right, not a handout.
Makes sense, right? It's a way to emphasize that you paid into the system, so you deserve those benefits later on. It's a powerful argument.
It is. It appeals to our sense of fairness. But Asen points out that this framing, focusing on the individual's contribution and what they get back, could actually make it easier to argue for privatization down the road.
Wait, how so? I'm not following.
Think about it. If it's framed as your money that you paid in, the argument that you should have control over it, maybe even invest it privately, starts to sound more compelling, doesn't it? It's like, hey, it's your money. You should get to decide what happens to it.
Ah, I see. It shifts the focus from the collective, from social insurance, to a more individualistic, what's in it for me perspective.
Exactly. And Asen argues that this focus on individual rights, while well-intentioned, might have inadvertently paved the way for those pushing privatization.
Fascinating. It makes you wonder how the conversation might have been different if the emphasis had been more on Social Security as, well, social insurance, like we're all in this together, contributing to a shared pool to protect each other.
Right. Like, how does that word insurance change our understanding of responsibility, both individual and collective, and what we think Social Security is ultimately supposed to do?
Insurance, it definitely emphasizes a shared risk, a shared responsibility, and a shared benefit.
It does. And that brings us to another key concept Asen introduces, this idea of policy polysemy.
Policy polysemy. Now, there's a fancy word. What's that all about?
Well, it basically means that the term Social Security can mean different things to different people involved in the debate. It's like we're all using the same words but have totally different pictures in our heads.
Oh, I've definitely seen that happen. Someone says Social Security, and I'm thinking retirement benefits, but they're thinking disability support or survivor benefits. It's all lumped under the same umbrella.
Exactly. So when someone says reform Social Security, their vision of what needs fixing and how to fix it depends on what they think Social Security is at its core, right?
Absolutely. And that can make productive conversation really difficult, can it? Like you're talking past each other because you're starting from completely different definitions.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with two different sets of pieces. It's just not going to fit, and it's no wonder these debates get so heated and complicated.
I'm starting to see how language really is at the heart of all this.
It is. And Asen takes us back to the very beginning, to those 1935 debates when Social Security was first established.
Back when FDR signed the Social Security Act, a huge moment in American history.
A huge moment. And Asen argues that the rhetorical choices made back then, the way they framed the program, still echo in our debates today.
Really? That's amazing. So what were some of the key points of contention back then?
Well, a lot of the debate revolved around who should be eligible, who should be covered, what kinds of jobs would qualify you for those benefits. It was all about creating a system that was broad enough to be meaningful, but also politically palatable.
So those early arguments about who's in and who's out, they're still shaping how we think about Social Security today.
That's what Asen suggests. It's like the language they used to define the program back then set a precedent that we're still grappling with.
That's wild. And it makes you realize how much history is baked into the very words we use, doesn't it?
It really does. And speaking of history, let's fast forward to more recent times, to those modern debates about Social Security. How do the different sides use language to frame the issue and push their agendas?
Well, framing is everything, isn't it? Each side tries to define the problem in a way that naturally leads to their preferred solution.
Give me an example. How would those pushing for privatization frame the issue?
They might talk about Social Security as a system on the verge of collapse, weighed down by promises it can't keep. Then, individual retirement accounts, privatization, that starts to look like the responsible, common-sense solution to make sure you have something for your retirement.
And those who want to preserve Social Security as it is, how would they frame it?
They'd likely emphasize its role as a vital social safety net, a cornerstone of American society, and argue that we need to strengthen it, not dismantle it. It's about protecting the most vulnerable among us and ensuring everyone has a basic level of security in their old age.
It's all about tapping into those deeply held values.
Yeah.
Like appealing to people's sense of individual responsibility or their belief in collective action.
Exactly. It's about connecting your policy proposals to those bigger ideals that resonate with people.
Which brings us to another tension Asen talks about, this back and forth between contributory values, the idea that what you get out should be based on what you put in, and non-contributory values, like social justice, and ensuring a basic level of security for everyone, regardless of their contributions.
It's a tough balance, isn't it? How do you reconcile the idea that people deserve to reap the rewards of their hard work with the need to ensure that everyone has a safety net?
It's a question that goes to the heart of so many policy debates, not just Social Security. And the way we talk about it, the language we use, reflects those underlying values.
It makes you realize that there's a lot more to these policy debates than just numbers and statistics. It's about values, about language, about how we see ourselves as a society.
It reminds me of this really interesting YouTube channel I came across, Mindful Moments.
Mindful Moments, what's that about?
They do these AI-powered analyses of audiobooks, looking for deeper meaning and hidden patterns in the language.
So kind of like what we're doing here with Social Security. Analyzing the language to uncover those underlying assumptions and how they shape our understanding.
Exactly. It's like they're applying a critical lens to audiobooks. And we're doing the same with this crucial social policy. It just shows you how important it is to be mindful of the language we encounter, no matter what we're reading or listening to.
It's like a reminder to always think critically, to question what we're being told, and to dig a little deeper to find the real meaning behind the words.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So as we wrap up this deep dive into Asen's work, what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, first off, remember that language is never neutral. Especially in these policy debates, it's being used to shape how you see the issue, the problem, and the potential solutions.
It's like a tool being used to persuade and influence.
Exactly. And the way those issues are framed, the language used, has a huge impact on the policies that actually get made.
And those policies have a real impact on people's lives. So it's not just some abstract academic debate. It matters.
Yeah, absolutely. Another takeaway is how much history matters. Asen shows how those early debates about Social Security, the language used back then, is still shaping our conversations today.
It's like those rhetorical choices from decades ago are still echoing in our modern debates. It's fascinating and kind of daunting, too.
It is. And finally, I think it's so important to be aware of that polysemy idea, to understand that people might be using the same words, but with very different meanings in mind.
Because if you don't recognize that, those conversations can quickly go off the rails, right? It's like you're speaking different languages.
Exactly. So be mindful, be critical, and try to really understand where the other person is coming from, what their definition of Social Security is, before jumping into the debate.
Great advice. And here's a final thought for our listeners to ponder. If language can be this powerful in shaping how we understand something as fundamental as Social Security, Think about how language is being used in other policy debates like healthcare, education, climate change.
All those hot button issues that are constantly in the news.
Exactly. What are the hidden assumptions behind the words being used? What are they trying to make you believe?
It's a call to action, to be more aware, more critical, more mindful of the language that surrounds us.
Because once you start paying attention, you can't unsee it.
Yeah.
And that awareness can be incredibly empowering.
It can. It helps you see the world and those big policy debates with a fresh perspective.
Well said. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the rhetoric of Social Security, please hit that subscribe button and share it with your friends. We've also included a link in the show notes if you want to learn more about Robert Asen's book. And most importantly, keep thinking critically about the language you encounter in the world. Thanks for joining us.